Record. We're recording. Thanks, Hannah. Okay. Let's start off here. I'm going to make this a bit bigger so we can see it together. What is the first place? Let's go to the documentation first. Let's hold on. Get this out here and start with a clean window. And let's go to React. Okay, so I'm looking at the React docs. I'm going to send this to everyone. So there's no need to follow what I'm doing, but I'm just going to send links as I go through this. There's a few things that we need to create a React app. There's something that React uses, which is called JSX. And this stands for JavaScript expressions. I wonder if no, we'll get onto that in a second. So one of the reasons there's a lot of complexity, not necessarily a lot of complexity, but there's a few things you need to install to set up a React app is because it uses, for example, it uses JavaScript expressions. Now this is something that isn't JavaScript, but it smushes JavaScript and HTML together. And we'll have a look at it when we find an example in a second. But as a result, we need a way to compile it together. Well, let's say transpile is probably a better, more accurate term. So it takes this and then converts it to JavaScript. And the reason why React has developed this JSX is to help it be more readable. But as a result, we need a few tools to help transpile JSX to JavaScript. And so there's a few things that come or is needed, as we call part of the tool chain, tools that we need to build React. Now, we can ignore all of this if we just use a script to do everything for us. And that's what we're going to do. And maybe in a few weeks' time, we'll come back and understand some of the tools that are underneath the hood. But for the moment, I want you to just ignore all of the tools and just run this command. And the high-level idea about this is there are some things that React uses that don't work in the JavaScript browser, in JavaScript in the browser. So as a result, we need to transpile them into JavaScript that can be read by the browser. Facebook has created React, and it created something called JavaScript expressions and a couple other things that aren't read normally by the browser. So as a result, under the hood of React app, there are some tools. The tools are Babel and Webpack that help transpile everything that you're writing into something that the browser can read, and then bundles it all together. So I don't really want to focus too much on that part, because that's just not really boring stuff. It's actually quite fascinating, but I want to just focus on the doing part. So we'll come back to that if we want to, or we can chat about it later. But for the most part, just run this and we'll explore it together. This is what I'm going to do. Run this. If you haven't installed anything yet, it will prompt you to install it. So you can just run this straight away. So let's try this. And I'm going to call this React Demo March. Let's call it, let's see. Okay, so when we run that command, it gives us some output. It creates a new folder, and then it installs some node packages, and it installs, importantly, the React package, the React DOM package, some scripts that will help us write it. So it usually takes a little while, because there's a bunch of packages that we have to install. As you probably already know of just using very simple applications so far, your node module has probably still got like 100 of these packages in it. So there's usually a few. So if you have a less speedy internet connection, I wonder what mine is right now. Oh, it's terrible. It's increasing. Still, it's still terrible. It should be up to 500. That's what downstairs is. Oh dear. All right. Still, it's fine. Okay. All right, it's finished finally. Thank goodness. Look at that. Almost 2,000 packages. It took about 1 minute to do. All right. So what we've done is we've added almost 2,000 packages. That's fun times. That's React for you. It's gone through and installed any more dependencies. It tries to resolve all the dependencies, and it also created a git commit. That's nice of us. Nice of it. And then gives me a summary of like commands I can run. I can run start straight away. Let's do that in a second. Test. So it just does a few things. It says happy hacking. Look at that. So we suggest that you begin by typing. Look at that. It even gives you a hint about what to do. So let's do that. cd react demo MSE npm start. And look at that. It already has created a Git repository here. So I didn't even need to initialize it as a Git repository. So just by running that npx script, it's created all the files and folders, all the stuff, and without me doing a single thing apart from running one line. Right? Quite fun setup. It's also installed the dependencies and probably also git hist initialize project using create racktouts. It's already created a commit for me. It's quite fun. Okay. What else I can do? Oh, we're just going to run that command that says I'm inside it npm start. Cool. So this is it built it all, and it says I can now see it in the browser. I can see it here on localhost 3000. So imagine what we were doing before. We were using HTTP server to serve our HTML file in a JavaScript to run it in our browser, and it probably gave something like localhost 8080 or 8081. Different ports are used by different default ports are used by different applications. So HTTP server by default has 8080 or 8081. React just uses 3000. 3000 is quite common. 3000, 5000, things like that. So we can go see it. Which window it in? So let's ignore that and put it over here. Yay! Look at that. So this is my React app. It gives me a template already, but let's have a look at what's actually here. So let's open it up. Okay, so this is my React project. There's a few things that are common that you've seen. So out of the public folder is where we serve the HTML. So it's not at the root, it's at the public folder. So this is the HTML page. It's got a few more things in it because of the bloat that comes with using a framework. It tries to think about what's the most common use case for anyone who's using React, and it gives you all of the stuff. There's a lot of it we don't need, and a lot of it you can just not worry about. So everything in the head is like metadata, and everything in the body is what you see on the screen. So the only thing that is in the body here is just like a little warning to make sure you have JavaScript, because we need JavaScript in all of these single page applications. JavaScript allows interactions. And then it has this element called with an ID of root. So then we have to go expect like where is all the content that we see, because clearly in the moment there's stuff on this page. So what's actually happening? So I'm going to close that for now. I'm going to have a look at my source folder. There's a number of things in here. that we probably don't really need, but the thing that we'll have a look at is we'll start at index.js. We'll have a look here. So the thing that you might see in this is on line 11, something that's similar to that we've been doing, where we use document get element by ID root, and this takes that element from the page. Over here, and then does something with it. And this, as you might remember, is very similar to that file that we had that grabs an element from the page and then updates it. But the way that updates it is using this component called app. There's this strict mode thing that you don't need to worry about. It just helps enforce some behavior. And there's this render. Ooh. So the render takes in an argument. You can think about it as just these two things here. It takes in the element and then where it needs to be placed on the page.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
What's that manifest JSON in the public folder?
Go have a look. Okay, so we have we render in the document, that root element, we render our app. Now this is the way to write a component how to refer to a component in React. Notice that this is not really JavaScript, it's not really HTML. This is JSX, this is JavaScript expressions. All right, so this is why we have to use some of the tools to help build it. We need a bunch of things behind the hood to make this work. This comes from React, and we imported this from one of the packages, and this render method comes from React DOM, and we render our component into this element. I'm gonna keep this here. I mean, that in a nutshell is how React works. We have a top-level file in index.js, which renders into the app component and everything that you need. So let's have a look at what the app component looks like. This is the app component. You can see it's simply a function. And it has a return statement that returns a bunch of HTML. Now, as you can see, again, this is not, we're in a JavaScript file, but this is HTML. So this is, again, React JavaScript expressions and how we write this. And so we can tell from here that our app component wants to render all of this stuff into document.getElementID root. And so over here, when we render the app, it asks app to return all of this stuff, does so, and then throws it into this element. So if I wanted to change how it looks at the moment in my app, what I need to do is just change some text. I guess that's a link. I can probably, rather than do it there, do it here. That's the paragraph. Whoops. Unintentional. Okay. So what I'm trying to demonstrate is just the flow at the moment of how this React application works. We start off with here at the top level to render our app component into our domain object model. And grab it using root. So we don't really change this. This stays as it is, and we can just mostly ignore this. But this is what actually renders the page to begin with. Our app component has a bunch of stuff in here, and you can see it imports CSS and other things that it needs. At the bottom is our export statement to make sure we export it. So let's let's drive ahead and let's test drive adding a component. And I want it to just be a very simple component. So let's imagine we're going to start off with the yet another to-do list, and just so it displays that heading. So the first thing I want to do is make sure I've installed Cypress, because I want to set up a feature test, and then I can go to navigate to this page and see it, and then I want to set up a component test. So the first thing I want to do is install Cypress. Uh, 117 packages, so I'll count as about 2,100 packages. We've installed Cypress, so I then want to just get it to start. Yeah, it's fine. All this stuff. Okay, so I now have some stuff here. That's fine. Yeah, no, goodbye. Don't need you. Okay, so then I want to let's set up a I don't really care. Let's just keep it all at one level. Let's say something like with all in one. Just to do list spec. Oh, that's a folder. That's not what I wanted. There we go. To-do list spec. Okay, so here I want to set up my to-do list, and so it's a quite straightforward. There's only one thing that we have to do to because we're testing React. Describe to-do list. It shows a heading. I want to what do I want to do? What do I want to do? I think all I need to do is something that's like I'm going to visit here and then contains what I want to see, which is yet another to-do list. I think that was what I was meant to do. Software development 1. Let's double check what we're meant to be doing. Yeah, fine. Okay, so this is I want to visit the index of my page and then make sure that it contains yet another list as text on the page. I could be a little bit more specific and try and like find an element. It's fine. This should be quite familiar as a Cypress test. The only part that might be different is this line here. But in order to run this feature test, I need to be running the application. And so in this file, I need to add in a place to go look. And let's double check how to do that. Cypress base URL, I think. What? I think that's going to be something like this base URL, right? Is an example. Not helpful. base URL. I think it's literally just like this. Let's try this. I think it's like property value, but this is going to be something like localhost. So I'm running it locally. It's going to be something like this. I'm going to double check that. So that should, as long as I'm running it, should then provide the, and that should be fine. Okay. Well, let's see what error messages that my test run looks like. Invalid value, base URL to be fully qualified. Yeah, okay, well that's useful. That's not clearly working. Okay, hold on. Let's look at this properly. Cypress and docs React. Let's look at this. Not component testing. I don't really care about component testing. Oh, look, there's an actual. I just want. This is not what I want. Let's get an example. Cypress and what's it called? JSON for base URL. Localhost. HTTP, something like this. Yeah, okay, so I'm on the right track, but I just need to know what the right value is for localhost. Okay, I'm going to. Is it just as simple as? No, because I've already got the domain. Hold on, thanks. Oh, I did it earlier, and it is like this. Okay. So I do have to provide it. It's a bit bizarre to give it, fine. Okay, so let's go back and have a look and try again. Open this up. And see what error messages my to-do list has. So I'm looking at the localhost, and the reason why it's working is because I'm running it in my terminal shell here. So I've got it running this. It's running, and then I'm also starting my Cypress server to check to see whether it's working. So that's usually the flow that you'd expect for a feature test. And make sure you run the server using React, and then run your Cypress test to make requests to it. And you can see here that I'm failing my test at the moment, which is good, because where is it? This one here. Because I haven't written anything on it. So I could pass this test by just going to my app component and doing something like yet another to do this. Have I got it right? Yet another. Okay, cool. So that's very similar to what everyone's been doing before. We can feature test our applications using Cypress. And the only difference that we had to do was to make sure that we gave it base URL, and in the spec we visit using the index page. This indicates just the index page. So as you can see in my server, this one here, just at the index page. There's no other information after this. The other change that we had to do was to make sure that we're running the application over here. So we run it, and we also run Cypress at the same time. Okay. Now, this is feature testing. This is not component testing. So if I want to set up a component test, I'm going to leave Cypress alone. Cypress we're only going to use for our end-to-end testing. All right, we visit the page and then we interact with it. And this is irrelevant to whether we use React, whether we use entirely a different framework. All right, the Cypress test should just be from the user's point of view. It doesn't care about the implementation. All right. So if we want to test our components, we can use the test framework that's built into React called Jest. And we don't really need to worry too much about it. It follows the same describe and it pattern that we've been used to. There's only there's an important part to this. So let's go ahead and set up a test for it. So I'm actually going to remove this. Hello. Go back to the folks. I'm going to remove it, and so that will fail. And I want to force myself to write a component that's responsible for that heading statement. So what does that mean? So I want to set up a test for it, and I'm going to create a folder called components. Conventionally, this is where most the component behavior lies. And I'm going to create a file called to-do list. Nope, list spec. And if you have a look at the test here, I guess they call it test, but the default is test. We're going to do something like this. So I'm going to copy this over into the file, and I'll explain what's happening. So at the top here is the import statement that we need to render components and then assert what they look like. So underneath the hood testing library, as you can see from that statement, builds a version of your component and then has like a shadow document object model that it creates to then assert against, because we don't actually need browsers for this. All it needs to do is find a way to render a component and then make assertions on it. So that happens all underneath the hood. But for that to happen, we need to import these two functions. Then we import our components. So for this, I'd do something like to-do list. And let's put it into to-do list. Yeah, that's fine. Let's create that in a second. You can use test or it doesn't matter. Both are fine. So you can leave it as test if you want to. But if anything is test is an alias for it. And let's call this renders heading. So first we have to render our component. So this will be something like to-do list. And then we have to make an assertion on it. So I want to, once I rendered it, I want to get the screen. So this is like using over here. This is like using Cypress and as the object to run our functions like contains and visit. Over here in the component, it's going to be render or screen. So we can render our component, and then we do screen get by text, and we expect like it to be on the page, for example. So I could do something like sure, I could use this pattern. I might just do it straight away and say something like this might be a little bit more readable, I'm not sure. I want to get the text that I want on the page. So it's going to be something like yet another to-do list. So my assertion here is I want to make sure that this text is on the page. Go with that. So just looking at the screen, making sure that it's there. And the only thing that should be on there is my to-do list, because I've just rendered this one component. So this is like trying to test your components in isolation. All right. So the only thing that is rendered on the page is the to-do list. And so I'm going to make sure that that to-do list renders this text, this heading, yet another to-do list, and I'm making a search that's in the document. Okay. So far at a high level, are we following? And should I go back over a few things?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Where can I find this documentation? Is it in Jest or React?
I would start off with the React docs and then go to the testing library docs. Jest is just the test runner. Jest does just make sure we have access to test and things like that in expect. Okay. So far it should be quite familiar in the way that a test runs. There's a few differences here, making sure that we have render and screen from testing library, and we're testing this in isolation. Everything else should be quite familiar. We're making an assertion, and so the familiar pattern of setup here. If we sometimes need to execute any code, it will still be an execute phase, and then at the bottom here we have our verifying. So let's run this test and let's see. It will clearly fail, hopefully, on this line here, saying I do not know what this fires. Big as we can see. So here we can just run npm test. What is going on? No such. Am I in the wrong? Because I'm in the wrong. Cool. Okay. So then we get into the jest runner. So this is something that is similar to Cypress, but runs on your terminal. All right. So you can continuously watch your files. And you can see here that we failed at the right place, which is my expectation, that we can't find that file or the module that should be in that file. And we have one passing test, which is our app.test, which clearly came with the bundle. So this is currently passing, which is fine. That's what we're currently looking at. So we have a failing test. And down here, we can sort of watch the usage, so we can run all the tests. There's different things that you can do. So if I just press A, it will just constantly run all the tests. So let's fix this. Let's create a component to-do list. Now you can see here that my test is updated. And saying that giving this long error message, it's saying something that says, warning, react.jsx type is invalid, expected a string or a class function, but you likely forgot to export your component from the file that it's in. Well, accurate, because I haven't written a component. So let's go ahead and do that. So in order to write a component, let's have a look. Doesn't really help us that much, but it should be something like import React. I can't remember. I'll have a look at it in a second. I think from memory it's something like this from React. So we have to make sure we import React, so we can actually use React in this module. Then I want to write a class that is to-do list. And here we extend component. And I want to be able to have a render function that returns h1 heading of yet another to-do list. have to make sure I export it. So there might be a few things I'm missing. So let's just double check the test and see how far we got. Oh, look, we passed it. Cool. So the one part we're missing is making sure we add this component into our application. So far, we've just tested this in isolation, this component. So in order to sort of make our app render it as well, we have to add it in here. So every JSX, so every component has to return one element, and there's usually a wrapping element. So as you can see here, there's only one element that gets returned, but within this element, there are nested elements. So if I wanted to add my component, I have to first import it, and import from components to-do list. Let's just be explicit now. And as a result, I have access to it. So let's put it below here. Let's put it above, actually. Let's go to-do list. And we'll have to check in a second any errors. We need to import to-do list from. I think that's how we have to do it. Okay, let's have a look at our cypress test. Where is it? Cool. All right, so we have yet another to-do list. Hello, folks. Oh, it's working. Where's my other browser? Let's run it again. Cool. So my feature test is working. Shows a heading, and my unit tests are passing. And so I've done my feature test and I've done my component test. And so we can see it here. So the way that I did this, again, to recap, was I created my unit test or component tested my component here. Sometimes you can organize your to-do list, your component and the spec for it in a folder. So sometimes people like to do to-do lists like, oh, that's not how you spell it. And then move them into here. So you just create a bunch of folders for your components that house your component and the spec for it. And sometimes also the CSS for it all in one folder. So you can keep everything organized like that. As well, you have to update all of your file paths to indicate that. This can be quite neat if you just have lots of components and you can keep everything sort of neatly structured like that. Cool. What else did I want to talk about? Well, let's just pause there as I demonstrated the two main things, or the three main things: setting up the React app, and trying to keep it as simple as possible. You can probably remove a bunch of other things that come with it. The most important thing is understanding from here, from index.js, how we import the top-level app component and throw it into the document using the root ID, because our HTML from the public folder starts off empty with a div element that has the root ID. So we inject everything into this element. And this comes from the top, the index.js. We import from the top level app component. This is like our app runner. This runs our application. It injects everything into the document. Our top level app component is responsible for all the other components. So if you add more components, you add them into the app. So sometimes you'll have a bunch of different imports into the top, and you try and keep this as slim as possible and just have other components that do work for you. And then you can import from your component folder the components that are component tested. Each component has a corresponding component test. So the tests that we're using as a component test are using two things. One is testing library to allow us to render a component and then make assertions on it. And then the second thing is jest, which does all the test running. So it gives access to test and expect, and then everything that you see here is run by jest. And you have access to it just by running npm test. Whereas Cypress is run separately, so is a separate end-to-end testing library that doesn't care about whether you use React or anything else. It just wants you to pretend to be a user and interacting with your site. So always start with a Cypress test first with any interactions that you want, and then a component test. Cool. Any questions? Okay, let me say, clearly there's going to be lots of questions because it's quite high level. Is there anything that you picked out that you want me to explain a little bit more about in the way that I did things here?
Yeah, you said you separate each component spec into separate folders. So if you have hundreds of components, are you expected to have hundreds of folders?
Yep.
Okay.
Sometimes you nest them again according to areas of the page.
Quick question. With the app.js file, are you then trying to keep that as slim as possible so you're just importing a bunch of components which are...
Yep, correct. Exactly. So if anything, you try and get rid of all of the stuff and just have components.
Just to clarify, what are we referring to when you're talking about components? Is it the HTML elements, like just maybe like the link or a paragraph or a heading?
Great question. When we think about components in React, we think of anything that has a render or returns HTML like this. So there are two kinds of components that I will talk about tomorrow morning. All right, because as you can see here, there is this kind of component, which is just a simple function, and this kind of component, which is a class. But they both do one thing, which is to return HTML.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, that makes sense.
Cool.
I had a question about the extends component.
Yeah.
So are you importing like a component from React and then extending?
Correct. That's exactly what line one does. Spot on, Paulina. So this comes from React. It's React functionality.
So every component needs to extend a component.
Every stateful component that when we use a class has to extend it. As you can see in this one, this doesn't. It's just a function, what we call a pure function or a pure component. I'll talk more about this tomorrow morning.
Okay,
If you're using class, which is probably the easiest thing to do for the moment, is just use a class that extends component that has a render function. This is important because render is part of what we call the life cycle of a React component. And I'll talk about that tomorrow as well. Good question.
Could you just quickly go over what you did with the local host and the JSON file?
Yeah.
I don't really understand what was happening there. And
yeah.
you were running two processes, the app itself and then the test in two different terminal windows? Yeah.
3. That's we're becoming super brain here.
What was the third one?
Cool. Okay, so really great questions, Susanna. The first one here is Cypress. Cypress, we need a way to indicate where to send requests, because over here in our test, we say just visit the index. The index of what or to what? So the way this works is in the visit method, you will take this argument and then it will look for any base URLs that currently exist and then say go to this location, which is why it works when I'm running it in my browser. It says go to this location, and then add in the index, and this is where it goes to. At some point, you might want to visit different pages if you have more pages. If you want to have, I don't know, more to-dos, you can list all of them, and you go to different parts of your application. It will still have the same base URL. So what this does is say, okay, give me the base URL to send request to, and then visit whatever you want. All right. And we have to make sure it's running. So I'm running it on the left-hand side here. I'm running my React app. This hot reloads. Every change I make updates. There's no longer any need to do refresh, like manual refreshing as we were doing last week. So you can leave this running and just like play around with your application and just see it update in real time. So leave that running. Then the other one was the Cypress test, as you can see. This is Cypress running. And then the third one was the component tests. So this is quite typical of development, of having different processes running. Running the application, running your end-to-end. Sometimes you won't always want to do this the whole time. Maybe you'll stop that for the moment and run it again when you're a little bit later. But it's fine to keep it running. And these are your component tests which should be running frequently. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. But the process that is running to kind of set up the local host, it's not HTTP server like last time. Is it just a functionality of React that it opens a port for your application to use?
Exactly. Yep.
Okay.
It's built into React underneath the hood. It does something like HTTP server. So we were doing that manually, installing that package ourselves and getting that to run last week. There's a version of something like that with React. I think it's actually called Webpack Dev Server. If you're interested, have a look.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Sometimes when you do npx HTTP server, it changes the the local address. Do you then have to change that in your cypress.json file?
Yeah. But if you're using the React server, Webpack Dev Server, it won't change. So you don't have to worry about that. I'm not exactly sure. I'd have to look at the HTTP server docs to figure out why it does change. Maybe it detects another running server and tries to give you another option. Because you only ever have one port in use at one time. So it might be that you run it somewhere else, or it might be just randomly chooses. I'll have a look. Cool. Okay. Yeah. More questions. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. So could I have a question about more like the general point of like using React, or what's the role of it? So according to my understanding, like, is the idea that instead of doing this text manipulation within the HTML file, we would want to do that within JS with the help of the React library, or is that something else? Like,
yeah. So as you can see, there's very little development happening in the HTML page.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, we want to be able to just test it in isolation using components, and that update the page using JavaScript. So I can add HTML to this page by updating it like we were doing last week with the inner HTML, inner text properties on elements. That all happens underneath the hood in React. So we don't have to worry about doing that sort of like nitty gritty. And all we have to worry about is the behavior, thinking about what do we want it to return. That then gets done under the hood by React.
Right.
So all we need to worry about is not worrying about the HTML, just worrying about our components and what they return, testing them, and creating sort of like the nice interactions. So part of these sort of like why people use React is because it abstracts away all the sort of like nitty-gritty stuff like we were doing last week, and just gives you JavaScript to play with. And it uses JavaScript expressions like this, so it mixes HTML and JavaScript together, but in sort of isolated component form. I think I'm answering your question. I'm not sure. Am I answering your question, Patrick?
Sorry, pardon?
Am I answering your question?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Okay, well let's wrap there, because what I want you to do is now go away and do it yourselves. And that might elicit more insights and interesting things as we go explore by yourselves. And have a go setting up a React app and setting up your Cypress feature test and then your component test, and just keep it super simple like I've done, because there's bound to be a few bugs along the way. I will upload this video, as it might take a few minutes for it to upload and pass all the checks, but I should have it with you fairly soon. And then this afternoon, you'll start again with your pair partner and continue on the set of requirements. All right. Any last minute questions for me? Cool. All right, folks. I will see you later. Bye-bye.